Welcome to Launch Today, the podcast focused on what it takes to get your new business to $1 million in revenue. From marketing tactics to incredible guest interviews, we focus on sharing behind-the-scenes insight from masters in their field. If you want to grow the revenue for your startup or business, you don't want to miss today, because today's guests are all about the numbers. Today, we're thrilled to talk about Patrick and Harmony. Nice to meet both of you, or I guess see you again. This is the high-powered team from Ones and Heroes, which is one of the best agency names I've ever heard of. Patrick's career is a testament to innovation and strategic foresight, from co-founding One and Heroes, an honest-to-goodness data solutions company, to leading as general partner at Echelon Fund, where he oversees a $50 million fund of funds. His work across various advisory roles and his commitment to making data the core of business strategy have set new benchmarks in the industry. Harmony's career spans roles that have changed how businesses leverage data for growth, including co-founding Ones and Heroes, leading as managing director of ITFSUS, our expertise in financial planning, team culture, presentations, and then these are combined with some unusual expertise in things like certified yoga instructor and death midwife, showcase her diverse skill set and holistic approach to leadership. Harmony, Patrick, thank you for coming on Launch Today.
Thank you. Thank you, Trevor. Lovely to be here. Thank you so much for inviting us.
So I met you guys, you folks, I shouldn't be gentle, I met you folks like 4 months ago, I think now. And really, I am not myself a really good data person. I pretend to be one for TV. I use just enough statistics to be dangerous with it. I think both of you bring a much more rigorous data discipline. Let me start by passing the football over to you, Harmony. You've got a huge background in operational leadership and strategy. And I think that's a really good combo to give unique insights on what you think is crucial for scaling a business in today's world.
Yeah, thank you, Trevor. And thank you so much for the lovely introduction again. I think, Patrick and I fell in love with data, formed Ones and Heroes a few years ago, to bring that love of data to our clients and our partners and those that are playing in the same space. And I think for me, the journey has been, I think it often is somewhat organic. We fall into opportunities. We find things that we're really good at. If we have great leaders, they give us opportunities to lean into that and play in that space more. And my journey brought me a lot of that. And so I was able to really be influential in helping businesses become data-driven cultures, leading teams where the business wasn't going to make a decision without first consulting my team to see, what do you guys say, whether it's bringing historical analytics or building predictive models, helping to really inform business strategy. And so that's like this undercurrent of all of my thinking, is that when you are empowered with that sort of data-driven view, the business can make decisions with much more confidence. And I think ultimately, though, it really is going to have to come down to the leadership having clarity of vision, knowing where the business wants to go, to then be able to incorporate the questions that can be answered with a data view to inform how to get to that destination. The critical thing that I have found over and over again around that process is the talent that you have. So in a lot of my experience, you'll see this people-focused leadership function and roles, because I have found that in a world of technology, always evolving, most organizations generally can have access to the same technology, the tools, but it's the people who are going to make or break, right? So a lot of my experience then comes to helping to arm the right people with the right data to make the right decisions.
Awesome. So how do you foster a culture where data becomes an important part of decision making? We've all worked in companies where the hippo's opinion, highest paid person's opinion, not an actual hippo. Like where they say they pay lip service to database, but then they go, but I like green better. And you're like, okay. Like, how do you, as somebody who works in an organization, maybe not as the hippo, but adjacent to the hippo, help steer towards, okay, yeah, but you said you cared about data and now you don't?
Yeah. Yeah, and I think honestly, Trevor, like some of that has been seen, and I definitely don't want to get into a political conversation, but we've seen it in politics,
Yeah.
and some of that research that says like people aren't actually convinced by facts or data. Oftentimes, right? We are emotional creatures,
Yeah.
and we need to feel it to believe it in order to change behaviors. So my approach, that's why it's a people first, right? You have to understand where the emotions are, the fears, the inspirations, the things that are going to motivate behavior change. And then it's bringing the data story that makes the facts feelable. I'm making up a new word there, right? So that they can feel what the data might do for them. And I'm a definite like carrot over stick sort of leader. I don't think you're ever going to get teams where you really want them with a stick. And we're human beings and we deserve respect and we deserve to be recognized for the unique talents that we bring, right? Figuring out where the data story fits into an individual's motivations to help move them towards that with the tasty carrots.
Ah, excellent. I think you led into a good next question, which is data does tell a story if you let it.
Mm.
I'm sure, as Ones and Heroes is a data focused org, tell me a story with data. Can you give me an example? If you have to redact client names, go ahead. That you had data completely changed someone's mind on something. I'm guessing you had to put some emotion in as well as the numbers. But what did y'all do?
Yeah. So there is an example that comes to mind of a large retailer here in the UK, and we're doing some radio advertising, and they did some in-house analysis looking at pre and post exposure, and their primary KPI at the time was footfall. And the analysis they got back was it gave them the narrative that radio isn't just not performing, but it may be actually harming or detracting from football. And their agency, and rightfully so, that's weird. That's not how media is supposed to work. Even if it's not performing well, it shouldn't be detracting, right? So they asked us to step in and do an independent analysis. And so we took a look at all the data that the client had looked at, but saw some key tells around additional data to enrich with. And so we grabbed some geographic data specifically. And what we found by applying a little bit of our kind of in-house machine learning tech, we're able to do much deeper analysis at scale, and we could look at what was happening on an individual store basis and overlay the geographic information with broadcast ranges of all the different stations. And once we accounted for things like seasonality and some like macro trends in the market, we found that actually this data was not necessarily telling the wrong story, but it wasn't teed up the right way. And actually, your radio was working just fine. And we just need to think about it a little differently. And so we helped to illuminate for the client, not just this idea that, oh, radio is doing some work and checking all your media boxes and, oh, it's adding value to your PPC and all the rest of that. But this additional narrative, this macro narrative, I think, around the way you analyze the data, the way you look at the data matters. And
Mhm.
the context and the thinking and the methodology that goes into it can totally change that narrative. And I think we saved them from making some really tricky decisions that could have gone the wrong way on their media side. I think we also helped them think about just the data differently and how they need to think about how they approach it and what they want to get out of it in a little more of a methodical way. I think it's a nice story because it doesn't just tell the story about how data influenced the business decision, but it came with this this two-prong thing of there's a culture around the data that you have to consider as well.
That's the people
Yeah,
part and the emotion part. Yeah, I like it.
yeah. if I can add a little onto that too as well, I think part of it starts to look like, how do business ask questions and make assumptions, right? And sometimes there can be gut feel or previous experiences, what questions are asked, how the questions are asked, and what assumptions are made without data actually answering those questions or informing those assumptions. Been like this operating gap, I think, especially in marketing. And so an example that I'll share, and I think was wrong question that this client was asking as well, that Patrick was talking about, and the assumptions that the data was able to refute. Years ago, when I was working at the Seattle Times Company, we had a new flashy vendor came in. They wanted to do direct mail for us, high gloss personalized letter from the publisher, and these beautiful purple envelopes, and a high quality, high production direct mail campaign. And we had a new marketing manager that was on the team. And so they wanted to show off a great return on this new marketing campaign. And so we ran it against what we called at the time our double ugly. So double ugly because it was a 4x8 postcard that we folded over. It was black and white print, had just the logo. It was ugly. Courier typeface, like it was not a beautiful production piece. Same promotional offer, and the double ugly outperformed the glossy direct mail every single time. And so it became like this measure of not performance, but also of that data storytelling around, like, our instinct sometimes, or our gut might drive us to, oh, I want to do this new fancy thing, or chase the shiny object, or surely we need to improve this. But have something to measure against, have a baseline, have a comparison. And it's a way of framing up the question around what you're trying to accomplish, or what you're trying to achieve or do or strive for, with a measure against whether or not you're headed the right direction. So questions and assumptions, and how data can start to really shift the culture if you're using data to both frame and answer those questions and drive those assumptions.
Yeah. One of my most recent blog posts I put out is, a lot of times when you do Crowdtamer's method of go-to-market, which is you're buying ads, you do ads to teach you about what the market wants. Mm-hmm. Facebook defaults just giving you a very simple view of the data. Facebook has hidden advanced reporting, which 90% of marketers never touch, right? They see the default reporting with impressions and clicks and conversions, and you go, great, job's done, Bob's your uncle. But when you go look at the advanced reporting and you start to layer on a pivot table with geography or more demographic data or this stuff, you learn a whole lot more. And the need to be driven by, like, for one client right now, we've got reporting where the general ad performance is mediocre for them, but there were like 4 states that are 3 standard deviations beyond the mean, which that's statistically significant. Even with a relatively small sample size, you can conclude something's going on there and say, oh, okay, something's different here, right? If the mean here is 0.4% and these are doing 2.2, what's going on? And so you can not necessarily say, oh, these states want to buy, but you can definitely go, something made these states more interested, right? Let's go find out why. And doing that and looking deeper in the data, right? Simple data is easy to digest, but it obscures frequently what you actually need to know. Patrick was mentioning, once you go look at radio coverage versus actual store locations and you map out all this data at a higher level of fidelity, you don't just go, we ran an ad here and this store that was closest didn't make any more money. And you're like, but there's more to it.
Yeah. And I think that's the power of a great analyst, right? And what Patrick and I have been lucky enough over our years of leading analytics teams is asking the question why, right? So the data point, seeing a blip and being curious about why, and then going digging. And that's inevitably, that's what leads to some of these little golden nuggets that really shift a direction or strategy.
Yeah, I think when it comes to trying to figure out that why, there's a trick that I always use. And to be fair, it drives my teams nuts. And sometimes I'm sure they hate it. But I call it the so what. And I have a rule of, I'll push it and I don't just ask it once. So if we're doing a review or walking through some of their findings before sharing and distributing them, and I'll say, oh yeah, this thing has gone up by 0.2, or as your example of, we've got 3 standard deviations in these states. Okay, so what? Right? You've given me an observation. Now, give me something interesting. And usually you don't get it on the first so what. So you gotta
Yeah.
push a little, and you gotta go past, oh well, maybe it's because of this. Okay, but so what, why does that matter? And once you start getting into the habit of peeling back this obfuscation, which I like your point of, makes it simple, but it obfuscates some of the real interesting stuff. When and simple can be good, and simple makes things accessible. It makes it easier to walk into a conversation, but doesn't, but it should be the starting point, not the ending. And if you can get people in the building, then you can take them on a tour and start giving them those so whats. Um,
That's the Kaizen 5 whys, right? So
Mm.
the factory
Why?
stopped producing cars. Why? We
Yeah.
couldn't
yeah,
move the conveyor belt forward. Why? Because and then you get down to, oh, it's because we overwork our engineer who was the only guy who knows how to fix this one ratchet, and so he took out sick, and the whole factory
yeah.
broke. And you go, oh, okay, then that's the thing that we have to fix now.
Right.
So you
Right.
totally
Exactly.
outed me. That's where I modeled it off of, 100%.
Gotcha. Sorry, I didn't mean to steal your thunder there.
No, it's great. No, because I share it because I think it's such an from an executional perspective, it's so easy to just ask the whys and the so whats. And all you have to do is start the process, catalyze it, and then you'll really, you can get some really good value.
Excellent. So let me ask you, because I think you talked about, obviously y'all are data led. This is a point I've talked about on this podcast and other podcasts I'm in a fair bit. 2022, my business did great. We did 70K. It was phenomenal. 2023, I did 180K. Things dropped 80% year over year. And this was a story of the market moved and I didn't move to catch up. I did eventually. I'm still here, but I didn't move fast enough. And as data driven as you are, I'm sure you have a way of thinking about how you package up what you offer, how you go to clients and say, this is what you need, this is what we do. Almost every business needs to continually reinvent that. How do you look at that data-based and not, as I did, just being like, I'm broke, what happened? Be data-based and say, when should we change things? What do we need to change? How can we stave off a bad year like I had last year by being more intentful on looking at your data as businesses coming in now?
Yeah. I think I feel very blessed in multiple ways, but in one, I think part of our success is the balance, the way Patrick and I approach business leadership. So we have a lot of overlapping values, but we have a lot of divergence in how we think about things too. And the fact that we have this differing view, but bring them together, I think helps us look at the strategy and vision and marketplace trends and people performance and technology in this really beautiful, holistic kind of way by balancing each other. So I encourage you to get a partner, co-founder.
Yeah.
No. But I think part of it is, and a lot of what my journey recently has been is realizing we don't live on islands. We don't operate on islands. We need that community. We need the connection. There's so much wisdom and intelligence and insight to be had out there. So part of it is community, network, a lot of conversations, comparison. And I'm a believer that, like, I'm not worried about competition really. There's so many problems out there that need to be solved. And we aren't, Ones and Heroes is not going to be the solution for everybody. And so we're always looking to help plug in and connect the right solution to the right person. And I'm a big believer in and trust that, like, that'll come back around to us as well.
Yeah.
And then Patrick helps to bring, okay, but let's look at it really concretely and factually and data driven and pull the numbers in to substantiate your feelings, Harmony. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And then how do you feel about that, Patrick? And
Yeah. I would agree with everything Harmony said. I've tried to go solo in the past and found it super hard. And for a lot of the reasons that you're talking about, Trevor, I have blind spots. There's things I don't see. And in particular, like sometimes they're obvious to a lot of people and I miss it. And having a partner who is, yeah, it's not that you're wrong, but you're way out of focus. I like that's super helpful. And and when you have these two different perspectives and these two different minds, and you start applying to things like how you talk about your proposition, how do you talk about your USP, how do you talk about the service offering, and the vocabulary and the words and the terminology, and all of these things have to iterate and stay current and relevant. And actually, we just went through that exercise this quarter, and it was it was a fair chunky undertaking, to be honest. But the whole time we were able to sense check each other and say, does this sound right? And then going out and talking to people like Harmony said, pulling all that information. And then again, this is what I heard. What did you hear? It's so powerful, I think.
Awesome. Yeah, I think you brought up something interesting, right? I do the same thing. I will go into a conversation with somebody. My wife is very good with people. I am not terribly good with people. And I'll walk away with one impression of what was said, and she'll say, that is so very not right. I find a lot of founders in particular aren't neurotypical. You revealed on your LinkedIn profile about 2 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
you talked about how you got diagnosed as autistic late in life, right, at 41, and how that's changed how you approach your business and life and all these things. Being open about this and how what that does with your day-to-day life and with your business, has that changed how things work for you at Ones and Heroes?
Yeah, yeah, like a lot. I think there's an external component and an internal component to that. Externally, I think people like being the fact that I'm open and I'm transparent, and I think it makes it easier to connect with people and have conversations where we could be talking about business, but it doesn't have to be like a hard sell, and we can just be two people talking about solving problems. Um, so I think that in a lot of ways it humanizes me, which is ironically something that I could use a lot of and like earlier in life. Yeah, but internally, I think it's unlocked this cheat code. I spent most of my career with my high school coach's voice in my head saying you're only as strong as your weakest link. And I would constantly work on trying to improve whatever I'm weak at, whatever I'm bad at. And I think when I got diagnosed, I got this kind of like cinematic aha moment of I'm never going to be good at this. Is something that no matter like scheduling, and I'm very open about it, trying to schedule a meeting is something that's just it's so simple and everybody does it, but I can find 10 different ways to screw it up. And now I can say, actually, I'm not wired for this. I'm not going to get better at that. And I've shifted. And so the voice in my head is now different. And instead of saying you're only as strong as your weakest link, now the voice is saying play to your strengths. And once I started playing to my strengths, it is a totally different game. And I don't know, Harmony, if you feel like you've seen a difference, but for me, I feel like a different person.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I think as a leader, when we think about building teams, my approach has always been around playing to people's strengths, right? If I could align an individual's strengths with a business need, then the employee feels successful, they feel like they're thriving, and the business gets what they need out of it. And so that's directly applicable to Patrick, right? So Patrick is able to bring to Ones and Heroes exactly what he brings to Ones and Heroes, which is exactly what we needed. And look, we all know our weaknesses. We all know where we're failing, and we all know where we might be stumbling. And we all feel yucky when that's what we're focused on, when that's our view. Nobody wants that. That shouldn't be where all of the attention is going. There was I can't remember, apologies for I think it was some meme, maybe it was Einstein. If you judge a fish on its ability to climb a tree, like it's never going to be a success. Figuring out where a person thrives, what their superpowers are, and having a role for them to do that makes everybody feel better. And back to, we are emotional beings. How we feel is how we're going to show up in the world, how we're going to connect with community. And the more we can do that in a positive, successful way, the happier the world will be. Too big a vision.
Yeah, I get that. I think a founder almost inevitably needs to have a certain lunatic self-confidence, because the business only exists because you believe hard enough that it does.
Yeah.
At some
Yeah.
point, the business has it's self-sustaining. It's like my mother is a little bit woo, and she's like, the only reason why planes stay up in the air is because enough people on the plane believes it does.
There's some physics
I mean,
too.
yes, but
but
she's an English teacher. Math is, you get beyond what you can count in your fingers, and she begins to get fuzzy with it. But it's very much the same. And eventually, there's either one person on that plane who really freaking believes, and the rest of us are along for the ride, or at some point we all just agree the plane flies, and then that one person can maybe relax a little. But for the first couple of years of a business, you're the one person who's, this will fly!
Yeah.
And everybody
Yeah.
else is, whoa, it's a long way down from here. So that confidence is a requirement for a successful founder, I think. And it is why I think a lot of founders are maybe a little touched in the head. But I think it is also, there's many different ways to approach being that person who believes hard enough to make the plane fly. Patrick has his strengths, Harmony, you have yours. You both bring a very different thing. Beyond your professional achievements, Harmony, you're a certified yoga instructor. Oddly, my wife is as well. And a death midwife. My wife is not that. This is obviously a completely different mindset than, let me go analyze data and stats and numbers and ones and heroes. How does this make you different as an entrepreneur? How does it make things easier or harder or better or worse for you?
Yeah, great questions. And such, you're right, in some ways, such bizarre tangential things to bring to a world of data and analytics. Honestly, I think that there are many different tendrils that sort of connect in and lead it back into like, why? Why? But the outcome is that I feel, for me, it does all fit together. While I love the world of data, analytics, technology, and how that can help businesses and communities thrive and inform smart strategy, we are human beings, right? Doing jobs, all of us wanting to feel and be of value in some way. And so for me, finding all of these variety of ways in which that value can be enhanced, improving my ability to connect with other human beings and their life's journey, those things start to play into it. When I talked at the beginning of the call around data influence, and it's got to be felt, it has to be somehow emotionally connected to an individual in order to move them. Like the training and becoming a yoga instructor, or the training and workshops and becoming a death midwife, are insights into the human emotional experience, right? And our fears, our motivations, how we show up each day, how we connect and find that sense of belonging. So they've enhanced my ability to bring that to clients, friends, community, networks, kids, whoever, which makes me feel like a better person and like I have more to offer. And I think probably one of those biggest data points in reality is that none of us are going to get out of here alive. And so the death midwife process, not to live in fear of that, but also to approach as a final rite of passage, how do we celebrate? And maybe not just that, but to bring a lens of celebrating every day. And honestly, I see it as almost just another view of focus on the strengths, focus on the positive. Yep, there are going to be pitfalls. Yep, there are going to be failures. Yep, there are going to be stumbles. Yep, we're going to make mistakes. Yep, we're going to die. But I'm not going to dwell on it today.
I get that.
I'm going to focus on the positive.
I heard about this from Dickie Bush, who writes about Tony Robbins, has done this, which is he spends every day finding 3 people to be grateful for. And you fill your mind with the gratefulness in the morning, right? You start your day with, I'm so very grateful about whatever this thing happened yesterday, a year ago, 40 years ago, whenever, right? Something that occupy your mind as a way to celebrate the good to start the day, because then the rest of the day you've got that in your head.
Right.
And so if there are, of course, there are always bad parts in the day, but that gives you a positive beginning to it. And then the flip side of that is like stoicism with everything's transient. Don't worry about it. We're all hollow, guttering flames that are about to be snuffed out anyways. Don't stress.
Yeah. There's another version of it, like when I think about bringing the Peter Drucker, right? So what gets measured gets managed. The other version of that is where we put our attention and focus, so becomes our reality, right? And not to get too woo around like where our thoughts go, but those are like data driven founded philosophies of like where we're putting our attention, where we're putting our focus, what we're measuring, what we're cataloging, what we're dissecting. That's our reality. That becomes our whole focus, attention, and where our energy is going, and our headspace, and our well-being. So that I think I think it's valid, right?
Yeah.
What are you focusing on? What are you looking at? What are you measuring? What are you thinking about where you want to be going? What am I thinking about where I want to be going? What does that look like?
That is Patrick mentioned he's not neurotypical. I am in a different way. I'm what's called aphantasmic. I can't make pictures happen in my head. And also, most aphantasmics don't have an inner voice. I don't either. So I don't have a voice in my head either. So people are like, envision your future. I'm like, everything is always just a TV turned to static. It's very quiet. It's quite restful. People talk about how their brain is like keeping up, and I'm like, that never happens to me. I go to bed at night and sleep the sleep, not of the pure, but of the forgetful.
I don't know. That's such a different experience from me, because I can't turn this thing off. It doesn't burst thoughts even when I want it to.
Yeah.
But so that when you say that and you share that with us, the first thing that comes to mind is, man, I would really love to get in it with this guy on a bunch of things and get a bunch of different perspectives and expand and grow. I think that's a really interesting superpower.
It's a weird one. Can't think in pictures. I think in bullets and lists, and I will inevitably, you'll see me in podcast or even when we spoke, and I'll say, hey, that's a great question. I'll answer it in 3 parts. And when I say that, I don't know what the 3 parts are. But I fully trust that my brain will, at some point, without informing me how it did it, provide me with the 3 things I've now expected it to do. And it works so often that I don't worry about the fact that I've said, so there's 3 different ways you approach this. I'm going to come up with 1, and then 2, and then 3. And at the end, I'll be like, wow, he knew his stuff. And I'll be like, what did I just say?
Wow.
That's a special kind of superpower, Trevor, for sure.
That's super weird. It's the combination of completely empty brain, but apparently very busy somewhere behind the stage.
Yeah. Interesting.
So, anyway, all right. I think the last question I always like to ask is, I find one of the best ways to open your brain and find something new is to read a book. It doesn't have to be a business book. I read last year 196 books in Kindle, and then probably an extra 40 or 50 on paper and other things, right? And most of them were not nonfiction. Most of them were random, whatever, escapist science fiction and fantasy and stuff. I'm a nerd. I always like to ask, what have you read recently that you thought was really good, whether it was business or non-business?
Yeah. So 2 things. I'm a fantasy series called Thieves' World from the 70s or 80s.
Yeah, I've actually read that a long time ago from the 80s, yeah.
Yeah. So I also read it a long time ago in the 80s, and I've decided to dust it off and try it again. But I've also read a book that was recommended to me by a colleague called 9 Lies About Work. And it's been really great. And there's a couple of bits in there that I think I could have heard a lot earlier in life. It's all about challenging some of the like stereotypes in management thinking and leadership, and offering like founders and leaders some counterpoints to what's considered common knowledge, but actually isn't really founded by a lot of data.
As we're now all living through the return to office mandates, which have been shown across the board to not improve productivity, but definitely decrease employee satisfaction, and yet we still find so many folks are forced to do it. Yeah, a lot of what we do in the office is, this feels truthy, so let's do it.
Yeah, that feeling part, yeah.
And how about you, Harmony? Is there a book you've really liked recently?
Yeah, I'm going to answer with 3.
Let's do.
So this last year, I actually turned back to the world of fiction and somehow stumbled across like 3 books in a row that were fiction, but about the opioid crisis, including Barbara Kingsolver's Demon Copperhead. And it was weird that I didn't go looking for them. They all just turned up, but fascinating for me because I love when I was younger, I thought I was going to be a doctor when I grew up. I love the whole medical field, anatomy, physiology. Like that's my extreme passion is like all things that like I probably should go back to med school, but I think I'm too old for it now. But the book that has come up the most, I actually read a few years ago and it's a little bit older, but it's called Mistakes Were Made, but Not by Me. And it's just this fascinating study about how the brain will write stories and create realities, air quotes, realities that aren't real, to justify our decisions and behaviors. One of the anecdotes in it, the guy talks about is this woman who was an author who said she became an author because her dad used to read her this book when she was a little girl and it inspired her to become a writer. Sometime in her 30s, she came across, her dad had passed away. She found a copy of the book that he used to read her. She picked it up and looked at it and discovered that it was published after her father had passed away. Oh. So her whole history about what inspired her to become an author never happened. It didn't happen because her dad died before the book was even published, right? So just fascinating. Again, back to what motivates us and what ways. And for me, how do I use data? There's a data point, right? To help inspire and motivate people. And then I just started a book called 4,000 Weeks. It is basically, we have if we're lucky, 4,000 weeks on this planet. What are you doing with it? What am I doing?
Interesting. All right. I try and always throw in some myself as well. By the way, Thieves World, did very much. It was part of the whole 80s. They would get these shared world anthologies. Thieves World, there was Wild Cards that Georgia Martin did. There were a couple other where they'd like all just agree. We'll publish like a book a year with 12 different authors and go. And that was a pretty cool one I remember checking out in the library when I was a wee young stripling lad. But so I'll give recommendations. I'll give a fiction one and a nonfiction one. I do Noah Kagan just put out, I think it's $1 Million Weekend. And a lot of what he's talking about with Noah Kagan's the guy behind AppSumo, but he just published a book on basically launch a side gig. Right now, we're all busy, right? We have stuff to do. And not everybody can do a side gig, and most side gigs won't be worth $1 million, let's be honest. But I think a lot of how he talks about try something, launch something, just get out there. That's super important. A lot of people have ideas that they're always like, oh man, someday I'll do this, and then you'll see, it'll be good. Just do it, right? I just hit this week, I've sold 900 copies of my book with no advertising of any kind. Like really, people see every week I sell a couple copies. I hate the landing page. It's terrible. And the book itself my designer made it look great, but he built it in Figma, which is probably the worst tool you can use to make a book. Okay, it's the second worst. PowerPoint is the worst. But this is right, it's neck and neck. So I don't have an Amazon copy of this. It's only sold through a Gumroad page that I put up in 5 minutes. Like, everything about it's wrong. I still made like $8,000. Right?
That's pretty cool.
Launch something. Yes, even something that you hate. The content of the book is good. The design is good. But everything else about it, I'm like, man, that should be so much better. But you know what? I have a business. I'm busy. Launch the book. It's done in a year-ish now. Right? Just that $8,000. Cool. That's a little win for me. If you read $1 Million Weekend, it'll help you get your mind in the right place. And then I'll give you two fiction recommendations. One for you, Harmony, Altered Carbon. If you have not read it.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Excellent.
Yep.
Because it's all about this transhumanism post-death thing, which I thought would speak to you. And then I have recommended this in one of my previous podcasts, but Red Shirts by John Scalzi is a really good book that is not at all about what you think it's about. I can't give away too much or I'll spoil it, but on the surface of it, it's about the red shirts in Star Trek, the ones who die all the time.
Right.
It's them, but it's also not. So you read it, and I think it got nominated for a Hugo, and I read it, and I went, oh, that's why I got nominated for a Hugo. It's very metatextually very clever. So
excellent. Well, you've just queued me up with additional reading material for my upcoming vacation to Mexico, so thank you very much.
There you go. Awesome. All right. Then let me wrap this up with a bow. If people want to find out more about Ones and Heroes or either of you, where do they go check you out?
Yeah, onesandheroes.com. Both of us are on LinkedIn, and If you reach there or via our website. And yeah, I love, again, the networking, the community building, the sharing ideas, the exploring how to solve problems, the referrals in and out to others, and how to help people feel and be successful. So,
All right.
any
Yeah.
questions?
Harmony, Patrick, thank you both so much for coming on the show today. Do stay tuned. Our next podcast episode after this one will be with Inbar Yeager, a radical, transparent enthusiast who also does growth and content marketing and has a lot to share about how you can get your business up and off the ground in challenging times. Thanks,
Amazing.
everybody.
Thank you so much, Trevor. Appreciate
Thank you,
it.
Trevor.